All right, everybody, welcome to the community architecture call for Konflux on Tuesday, February 25th. By participating in this call, we are agreeing to follow the code of conducts, and the recording of this will be posted to our YouTube channel at some point in time in the near future. Um, on the agenda today, we have one topic from Adam, follow up on the documentation. Adam, you want to take it over?
Sure. I'll go ahead and share the kind of working document that I have. Unfortunately, it's internal to Red Hat at this point. It's hard for us to share stuff outside of Red Hat. But the gist is to have a plan around generating API kind of documentation. And so I wanted to share here just to kind of make sure that I'm on the right track here when it comes to the types of API docs that we really want to have generated from code, and kind of put boundaries around what should be in scope or out of scope, or should just be kind of referenced out to other projects. So a lot of the sort of the controller code that I have here, most of that came from looking at what was in the infra deployments repository, seeing which ones were effectively within Konflux controllers versus outside Konflux controllers, and then of those, which ones of those had Kubernetes APIs that they were adding through like a custom resource definition versus those that were strictly just kind of internal within the cluster and weren't exposing an API that an end developer who's using Konflux would be able to consume. And then the second item that I started looking at was thinking about what to do with our task catalog with build definitions. I'm thinking about if there's potentially a means for us to generate documentation from the task YAML that is in there. And finally, then thinking about outlinking to components that we know that we are either deploying alongside but have their own upstream controllers and components, or we know that they are tools that we are utilizing within our catalog. So that is the gist of it. So I just want to hear just kind of like feedback on rough idea, thinking about what is kind of in scope versus out of scope.
Silence means everybody's okay with it all being in scope.
Everything.
I mean, I know that we've tried to document the tasks that we had before. I know that he did some initial exploration trying to get those, the Tecton catalog or the Tecton tasks and pipelines that we have contributed to the documentation. So, I mean, I think that that's definitely beneficial. So we can have a single point of reference. People won't have to. And I've actually found myself trying to link people to the documentation and build definitions for specific tasks recently. So having that all in one place seems like could definitely be beneficial. One thing that we should just keep in mind, though, is that there's also some work going on to decentralize these tasks. So whatever our approach is for this documentation and integration, we should make sure that it's compatible with that work.
Okay. So I'm wondering, in terms of like tooling around this, if it might make sense to, if we're decentralizing those definitions, if the way we bring those together might be around. Well, actually, let me step back a bit. By decentralizing the definitions, is there still going to be a kind of main kind of bundle that we are going to reference um, within our pipelines, or like that OCI artifact, or is that still, could that be potentially be multiple um, OCI artifacts, and then it would be part of like your enterprise or your conformal policy to say which bundles are acceptable versus which ones are not?
Yeah, I mean, the approach is similar to how it is today. Um, like right now, all the tasks are Tecton bundles. All the tasks would still be Tecton bundles because that's the process that we have for defining what acceptable tasks are. So that's kind of how we base that conformal validation on. It's just that those tasks won't be generated in one place. We might have potentially multiple different uh, images defining what the latest tasks are and what the hierarchy of them is. Um, Today we generate pipelines, pipeline bundles. We don't use them today. There's also some work for exploring that to use pipeline bundle references. Um, the pipeline bundle references would likely not be produced in the same place as the task bundle references, just because they would reference tasks from multiple different locations. So I mean, there's generally, I mean, it's a large chunk of work, and I can link you to that ongoing work if you want to review it.
That would be great. Thank you.
It's a slightly different topic, but our APIs, our Kubernetes APIs, a bunch of them have pretty meaningful annotations that are not as part of the spec. If you annotate a component a certain way, then build service will re-trigger its sending of a pull request. Or if you annotate a snapshot in a certain way, that'll cause the integration service to rerun tests that it had run previously. And if we were just generating stuff right out of the API automatically, I think we would miss those. So we need some. Maybe we should call it as either explicitly in scope or out of scope. I'd like to see it because that's some of the most helpful stuff for users are those little knobs.
Yeah, and that might be something that I think if we establish a convention around those annotations, um, that might make sense. For example, with the tools that if they're looking at the top level object, you can have a larger kind of Go doc for that object that gives that additional effective API, but it's not Kubernetes enforced. It's just there's an annotation that triggers some kind of behavior. And I'm wondering if, like, as we evolve, that might be signals. If those are genuinely useful annotations, things to add, to what extent should those be promoted from an annotation that changes behavior to an API that changes behavior? So, yeah, Andrew has the comment that the current API in the rendered architecture repo, and it, my understanding is some of that might actually be. I was trying to figure out if that process is still active or if that broke in some way, but it would be the same tool that would be used. I found that to be easier to generate docs from code versus some of the other tooling that the Kubernetes project uses. Their tool chain is a little it's intentionally smaller scoped, but it does multiple steps, and there's different tools. So like say, go from the Go code to open the API state, back from that to whatever it is they are using to generate the docs on the website. It's a whole lot of spaghetti. And I think even the SIG docs maintainers will admit that. I found it very challenging to try and use. So that CRD Rec Docs tool much easier. And if you use KubeBuilder, it works like a charm.
Andrew and I were both commenting in sidebar for everybody else for the recording. There's a link to the GitHub workflow where we're building that right now, but it appears to be broken.
Yep. So it was definitely inspired. I actually kind of proof of concepted this, not with how this could work, not with Konflux, but with Shipwright, where we had the same problem. So I right now have a script that is able to clone from effectively any repo that you give it. It will run the CRD Ref Docs tool and then generate the output. And it also brings the template entry so that we can fine tune what that looks like. I have one other question, which might be, should we potentially distinguish some of these tools here that are maybe more important for a cluster admin or someone trying to deploy Konflux for their own organization versus the bits down here that are more likely to be end developer focused?
I think yes. Although I don't know where we would even render the first four that would be like meaningful in the docs that are on, the Konflux CI docs page. I think most of that is all end user focused.
Yeah.
Anything that's like admin focused or operator focused lives in the README of Konflux CI.
Yeah. So maybe we keep those out of scope.
That's my
They're more admin focused.
Wait for you to finish editing. So I'm just thinking about the user experience. We maybe even talked about it a week or so ago, that if you're a user coming along and you want to say, what are all these Konflux APIs? And if you get release services APIs, integration service, and build service, but you don't get Tecton, it feels like in the same page where you would Control F looking for something. It feels broken in a way. But on the other hand, I feel it doesn't feel right to like render our own version of Tecton's API docs. Yeah. But I don't know how to solve that.
So my thought was, at least in that kind of like same like API rep kind of section, have a thing for Tecton, but instead of it be auto generated, it would be the outlink to whichever Tecton pipelines version.
Yeah.
And if I recall right, Tecton might not have that kind of same rendered API reference document. I think right now they have like articles about pipeline run, all of those things, and they're pretty descriptive. They're but it's not that same kind of like rote reference. This is the YAML that you can consume.
Yeah.
And that might be something that I may try and influence and try to say, ask the Tecton community, hey, maybe we can restructure the docs a little better, because the way they're doing things right now it's a little messy. At least my experience was. Oh, Vincent actually just put a link to a pull request. So it looks like there's a PR to generate the Open API spec, or fix how it was generating the Open API spec, which would then I think be consumable by, it's effectively becomes like a Swagger. Yeah, and that CRD rep docs tool would be hard for Tecton to adopt because they're not using Builder. Anything else?
I mean, maybe I think it's great. Let's do it. So how can people help?
So I think as a next step, I was going to probably POC rendering out that the reference doc for the controllers that we have. And probably the next action would be for the groups that own those APIs to review them and see if what's generated makes sense, or if there's a doc improvements to the comments that are there in the doc to fix things. And I think, Vincent, I may also put out, maybe I'll raise something in either the community or the Tecton website repo on getting generated API docs. And and I can point to some of the other stuff that I had picked up from Nate Waddington.
Is there anything else that we want to talk to about this?
Maybe do we want to talk about like Mint Maker and Renovate? Because that's something where like we have effectively a fork. So we have like some extra things that Renovate doesn't have, but there's also some of the core configuration is driven by the upstream renovate project?
I don't know if we have representation from the folks that work on this call right now. But I mean, we the generic pattern of these other tools, like we have for Conforma and Hermeto, like and build it even to some extent, but maybe that's a little bit different because we only allow certain operations. I think that we just need to figure out what that interface is going to be. The pattern that we've tried to do so far is like give some high level overview of Conforma or Hermeto on the complex documentation and link out to the other documentation as well, just so we don't have to keep the complex documentation up to date with all of this. I know that I've asked at least for MintMaker team to add some documentation to Conflux upstream to at least start to expose relevant information, what users will get as a automatic benefit from deploying and leveraging Konflux. I think that we can certainly try and talk about it some as we refine this feature to figure out what patterns we might want to try and encourage from these other projects that we leverage.
Yeah, and that was something that I kind of put as out of scope for this item, but certainly as a follow-up, this will probably prompt us to, or help prompt us to revisit some of the higher level documentation that we have, just to like explain what Konflux is and what's in it. Having those pointers to the actual API reference will, I hope will maybe help that make that a little easier, and also on the flip side help expose kind of the gap between, well, why does this thing here? This is why this thing is here.
Yeah, and I just realized, Ralph, to your point before, I think it was your point before about the annotations that have functionality that's out of scope right now because build service is out of scope. So that's the non-CRD driven API. If we want to try and bring that into scope, we can have that discussion, certainly. All right. If there's nothing else on this topic, I see that Andre added another topic to the agenda.
I'll stop sharing.
This is more like a general question. What would we want to do about it? So probably quick topic. I would love to see public access to the tenants. I've noticed there is already a draft feature in Jira about that, and I wondered where we are on that. So first, it's very annoying to need to give anyone who opens PR in our repo an access to Konflux, right? But second, this feels like a must for any community project usage of Konflux. So I wondered if there was any movement. I haven't seen any in the draft feature, but yeah, I've got no idea what's happening in what parts of Konflux. So I was wondering if there's any movement on the topic.
One big thing that's been ongoing that has gotten in the way of this is this proxy layer and abstraction layer that we have in front of Kubernetes. It was originally called Sandbox and then called kubesaw. And we're in the process of removing it. Some instances of Konflux already have it removed. So where it's already gone, I think the theory at least is that giving public access to your namespace would look like creating a role binding with view rights for the system unauthenticated group. And we should just try that. and see if it works. I think on some of the clusters where I know you're doing some builds, Andra, I don't think it'll work yet because that kubectl migration hasn't finished yet. But we have some other clusters where we can try it out and see what else breaks. Yeah, right. Because maybe the UI makes some assumptions in some places. Let's go find them.
I would be happy if I'm told this will take 3 months and we need to figure something out first. But yeah, here I'm asking just for the general direction, and if I can help. So
Yeah.
if I can help to test something out for this, I would be happy to do so.
Let's go do it in the Fedora cluster.
Sure.
Yeah. I'll put for you and for others, I'll put the link to the tenants config repo, and let's add a role binding for any old namespace to that system unauthenticated group and give it a try.
Yeah, I think it's a must in Fedora namespace actually. So that would be the first cluster to try. Should I try hack on it? I've got no idea what I'm doing, but I'm happy to try.
Yeah, you should totally do it.
Okay, any documentation on that you can guide me to get me started on what I'm doing?
For this, there's a document for just connection details for the Fedora cluster in general, which I'll put I guess I'll put in the notes so they're easier to find. And then in that tenants config directory.
Right, but on the public role, authenticated role access, what roles are available, how to define that? Would it be Konflux related roles or Kubernetes roles?
There would be a Konflux role that we would want to bind to, but the group would be a Kubernetes system group.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I might try to give it a deep dive and see where I get.
Awesome. Thank you.
Are there any other topics that you want to bring up for this call?
I don't.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for the conversation. We'll see you all next week. Well, I won't see you next week, but other people will see you all next week.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks all.
Thank you.
See you.
Thank you.
Cheers.